A Tall&Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 43, and Everyone Needs a Little Hero, Chapter 30, True Colors Revealed, Part 3. It was such an odd sensation. Usually, a human's room felt immense. The furniture towered above, and the wall on the opposite end of the room felt like an impossible distance to cross without being seen. Rooms were usually quiet, and rarely were 2 or 3 borrowers in a room at once. Not now. Everyone was here. Everyone was out in the open, because there wasn't enough furniture to hide under. The vastness of the room felt lost to how many borrowers were there. The silence that would usually mask their movements was filled with their worried whispers. So much had happened all at once, and every mind was reeling with possibilities. When would the mist dissipate? Should they leave? Migrate to somewhere new? Should they all stay together? Or was it time to say goodbye to long-term friends and family? What were they going to do next? The Rafters family went from family to family to make sure everyone was recovering well. Though some were still coughing and wheezing, the whole community was relieved to hear that everyone had managed to make it out of the walls. Still, it was Hero who led the charge in reassuring everyone, especially when it came to their questions about the human of the house. Hero made sure that everyone knew that Ashlynn was not going to bother them, and that she was honest and kind. He said if they asked, she wouldn't come into the room. Knowing a human was just on the other side of the door was a terror everyone was uncomfortable with, but there was no alternative. Many of them had no provisions or supplies, not even a weapon on their hip. Truly, this was their worst nightmare. Every few minutes, they would hear Ashlynn walking around or a creak of the floorboards in the apartment above, which would instantly silence the community. They would stay quiet before resuming their hushed whispers, discussing what they should do next. Then, after a few tense hours, Ray, Soren, Dorian, and even little Maisie slipped under the door with blankets and a few limited supplies. Mostly, they came to take stock to see what everyone needed. At first, some of the borrowers shied away from the family of 4 who had made their home with Ashlynn. They knew about Hero Rafter's interaction with Ashlynn, but the concept of these borrowers living peacefully with a human seemed unthinkable. It wasn't until Soren and his brothers had told their story about meeting Ashlynn and how long they had known her that it began to sink into the borrower community. Ashlynn was a friend, and she had been a friend for many years. The young girl, about Ray's age, who was trapped in Austin's van, stared at Ray, eyes wide, as he told the story to them. The children were thankfully asleep, but Emil, his wife, Kit, Leon, and the teenage borrower were all fixated on Ray's story. None of them were able to tear their eyes away from the young teen as he finished explaining his past for the umpteenth time. "So," said Kit, "she pulled you out of the trash and brought you back? All without hurting you?" Ray nodded and tugged a grin onto his face. He didn't mind explaining his past, but holy smokes, it was taking a long time. He wanted a way to do it all at once, but that would involve Ashlynn's assistance, and these borrowers were obviously not ready for it. "That's right," Ray stated. "Ashlynn has always been very careful around us. It's one of the reasons Soren trusted her to save me, and why he felt comfortable letting us stay here with her while we recovered. Remember, we could have left at any point. Ashlynn made sure we knew that. She even kept our beds on the ground under her bed frame, that one right over there, so we could be hidden. Ashlynn is our friend, and I swear She won't do anything to hurt us. She's doing everything she can right now to make sure we're okay, and that you'll have everything you'll need and want before the end of the night," said Ray. "How can you trust her after what you've seen humans capable of?" asked Emil, which earned a nod from Leon. "How do you know she won't turn on you?" "It's because I've known her for so long. If she was going to keep us pets or try to hurt us in any capacity, she would have she wouldn't have waited 8 years to do so. She would have done it when we were all helpless," said Ray firmly. "Look, I get where you're coming from, and I'm not asking you to blindly trust her. I'm asking for you to take a second and give Ashlynn a chance. I know it feels like an impossible ask, especially after what you all went through, but I promise she'll protect you." The group and the nearby groups, who were pretending not to listen, all quieted to look at one another before looking back to Ray. "It's a big ask, Ray," said Leon, his eyes shadowed with memories and torment. "If we all pull out of this okay and Austin pays for what he's done to us, she'll be okay to me." Ray nodded, features hardening. "Oh, he'll pay. I don't know how yet, but he will," stated the teenage borrower. "Until then, is there anything I can get you to make you more comfortable?" Ray finished taking notes on what the others needed and wanted, before standing and promising he would be back with everything they asked for. Just before he turned to leave, the young teenage girl reached up and caught Ray's hand, clasping it tightly and looking up into his pale blue eyes. "Larkspur," she said softly. Ray felt his head tilt to the side in confusion. "Oh, what now? Is that something you need?" he asked. The girl glanced away as she held onto Ray's hand, while her other hand reached up and clasped the neckline of her frayed shirt. My name. You said that you wanted it, if we made it out," stated the girl. That was right. Ray did want to know her name after hearing her say something about leaving her behind because she would be a burden. Ray felt a pang in his heart as he crouched, still clutching Larkspur's hand, and reached over and tenderly coaxed her to look at him again. "I did want to know it, and it's very pretty. Thank you, Larkspur," smiled Ray. The girl's eyes widened, and her cheeks were suddenly flushed as she locked eyes with Ray. Something made the young teen's insides flip, but he couldn't think about that now. He smiled again, stood, and headed back toward the main door, promising he would be back soon. This was insane. This whole thing was crazy. Ashlynn tried to work in the kitchen as quickly and as quietly as she could, but the slightest sound made her wince. The clatter of a spoon against the counter, the floor squeaking right where the tile met the wood, the fridge door sealing shut. Every minute sound felt amplified beyond the norm, all because of Ashlynn's house guests. She wasn't sure what it looked like in the other room, but her imagination filled her bedroom with borrowers lined from wall to wall, huddled under furniture and trying to keep quiet. The fear, even from here, was tangible. It was a terrible set of circumstances, and Ashlynn had taken the plunge right in the middle of it. From what Ray had described, Austin had spread some kind of knockout gas in the main elevator shaft and the walls. She was immensely grateful she had closed the vents to her room before everything started happening. Now everyone was exposed, out in the open, in her room, obviously hanging on to a single thread of trust that they gave her. Ashlynn needed to make the most of it. She needed to find some way to help calm them all down, and she knew just the borrowers to talk to. When Ray Dorian and Soren came back with their list of various supplies, she sprung into action. A lot of these things were simple enough to obtain, and most were meant to provide protection. Thumbtacks, safety pins, thread, paper clips, cloth fragments, cotton balls. Most importantly, food and water. So, that's what Ashlynn worked on. With the supplies she had, she started making some very simple vegetable and noodle soup with little fragments of chicken. She took the time to make sure everything was mulched up into bite-sized pieces. She also broke up cracker fragments and put them into a bowl to accompany the nutrient-rich broth. While she worked, the boys brought back fragments of aluminum foil for everyone to make their own bowls and utensils. There were no complaints from the families as they accepted generous portions of the foil from Soren and his brothers. When it came time to distribute the food, Ashlynn placed portions into a few larger bowls and cups, and, with permission and plenty of warning, opened the door with the tiniest of cracks and retreated back to the kitchen so Soren, his brothers, and the rafters could distribute the supplies. Like an assembly line, everyone tiptoed toward the door and accepted the food and supplies without issue. As everyone went through the line, the rafters took note of who was and was not there. By some miracle, everyone had managed to make it out of the walls. From old to young and those living near and far in the building, everyone had managed to make it out safely. Still, it didn't stop the fact that evidence of their entire community was still in the walls. "What matters is that we all managed to make it out alive," said Soren as he walked back with Casper after dragging some soft washcloths under the bed to serve as bedrolls for a few of the younger families. Casper nodded heavily, but it was apparent to Soren that the middle-aged father did not quite believe him. Soren understood the feeling. He knew the other family's terror of having their whole world exposed, because he had gone through it once before when he met Ashlynn. He remembered clear as day how terrifying it was to surrender his security and the safety of his family to someone he barely knew or trusted. That feeling of helplessness in the room now was tangible, and he wished he could do something to help. What was different now was that he knew Ashlynn was on his side. Soren's thoughts came to a screeching halt when Casper laid a hand on his shoulder, clasping it firmly. Soren felt the weight of the world in Casper's hand as he tightened his grip ever so slightly. The middle-aged borrower's eyes were tired and latched onto Soren's gaze before he spoke. "Soren, do you think Ashlynn would do us one last favor?" asked Casper. Soren, taken aback, simply nodded. "I'm sure she would. What is it?" Soren asked, trying to smile reassuringly to help the father of 5. "No, I'll..." Casper swallowed dryly as he obviously attempted to summon the words. Thankfully, they weren't needed. Soren knew that Casper wanted to do this, and so he merely nodded and gestured for Casper to follow him out of the room. Soren could feel everyone's eyes on him and Casper as they walked out of the room and into the living area toward the kitchen, where Soren immediately noticed Ashlynn, who was sitting on the ground with her head resting against the lower cabinets. Casper's steps faltered momentarily as he spotted her. Though this wasn't the first time he would have been seen by her, it was still an unnerving experience. Soren waited for Casper to compose himself before both of them walked up toward her. Ashlynn, deciding that sitting on the floor in the kitchen would possibly be the best at keeping the borrower community at ease, was resting her eyes for a few minutes and trying to anticipate what the room full of 5-inch-tall refugees would need when she heard Soren calling her name. She opened her eyes slowly and glanced down, expecting only him, and held stock still when she saw Casper Rafters. He looked just as nervous as she felt, but she still decided to break the ice first to help make things easier for him. "Mr. Rafters," she said quietly. "Everything okay?" The borrower cleared his throat before nodding.
Yes. And no,
he stated stiffly.
The good news is that everyone is present and accounted for. And I cannot begin to thank you enough.
Casper shuffled his feet as he puffed out his chest a little in hopes to portray confidence.
Unfortunately, there is the other issue of what we left behind. If anyone goes into the elevator shaft, they'll see the hub and all of our supply tables. They'll see some of our homes, doors, and furniture, which is enough evidence for some.
Ashlynn nodded as she took in the information. Soren, as he listened, folded his arms and glanced from Casper to Ashlynn, eyes widening as he realized what Casper wanted Ashlynn to do.
"You want her to go into the elevator shaft and hide the evidence?"
asked Soren. Casper winced, Soren having guessed his favor, and looked up into Ashlynn's blue-gray eyes. Soren's insides squirmed as he listened to Casper clear his throat nervously once again, and began speaking.
"Ashlynn, no. Could I ask this favor of you? I may not have earned it, but this isn't just me asking. I'm asking on behalf of everyone here. All of our kind is risking exposure, and the only thing that stands in between the safety of our community and the destruction of our kind is what is left," said Casper. "Whatever you want from me, you may have it. Just, please."
Soren had heard enough. If that gas was as dangerous as they thought, Ashlynn had no business going in there.
"Casper, Ashlynn isn't allowed in the elevator shaft. And that gas is
"I'll do it," said Ashlynn, interrupting Soren. Soren whipped around to look up at Ashlynn, catching her blue-gray eyes as she looked determinedly at Casper. "I'll do it. I'll grab what I can and make sure there's nothing too obvious."
"Ashlynn,"
said Soren firmly. Was he hearing her correctly? His arms slackened at his sides in disbelief.
"It's dangerous."
"I know, but I'll be careful," said Ashlynn as she looked down into Soren's hazel eyes. "We don't have time to debate it either. If Austin is waiting for the gas to dissipate or is getting ready to go into the walls, we need to beat him to the punch. Casper is right. We have to act now if we want to protect everyone from him." Soren placed his hands on his hips and took a few steps away, turning his back to her. He didn't know exactly what the gas did, but there was no time to get anyone else to spot Ashlynn in case she ran into trouble. His mind was made up.
"Then I'm coming with you,"
stated Soren as he turned and faced both Ashlynn and Casper. Ashlynn opened her mouth to protest, but Soren beat her to the punch.
"If you run into danger, you need someone watching your back. Plus, I can get further into the walls and get rid of any signs we were there."
Ashlynn looked at Soren, smiling as she realized there would be no talking him out of his decision. "All right, let's get some rags to wrap over our faces and get in there," stated Ashlynn.
"Thank you, Ashlynn,"
said Casper.
"Truly, I can't say it enough."
"Just make sure everyone is all right, and don't let them do anything rash. Leaving now is dangerous, and it will be playing right into Austin's hands," reminded Ashlynn.
"I can do this much. Do you? I mean, what is the plan for taking care of him?"
asked Casper. Ashlynn sighed heavily, biting her lower lip as she thought. "I have a few ideas, but let me worry about him later. Now we have bigger issues. May I stand?" stated Ashlynn. With a nod from Casper, She pulled her legs in and carefully stood at her full height. Her full height was vertigo-inducing, and Casper staggered back out of pure instinct before stepping to the side of the wall and letting Ashlynn pick up Soren. Together, they slipped into the bathroom and began constructing makeshift facial covers to help filter out whatever the gas was. Would it be enough? They were about to find out. With the backpack affixed to her shoulders and Soren secure in her pocket, Ashlynn left the apartment and made a beeline to the elevator shaft. Her hand instinctually rested on her pocket as she stepped inside the elevator and clicked the top floor button. She knew there was an access shaft on the top floor, and that was her ticket in. She stepped out of the elevator and walked across the roof and up to the maintenance door. She knew it would be locked, but she adjusted the trip for that. She glanced around quickly and saw no one on the roof by the greenhouse either. Perfect. Soren, need a lock undone. Ready? She asked under her breath as she crouched and pretended to tie her shoe. Her pocket shifted, and with a quick sleight of hand, Soren was on the ground and sliding under the door. The room was completely dark, but that didn't deter Soren. He spun his hook and let it fly into the air toward the spot where he knew the handle was. It was precarious work, but after he climbed the line, Soren strained against the lock and finally managed to get it undone, nearly falling off of the edge of the handle as he balanced. He slid down the line and back under the door, giving Ashlynn access to the maintenance room. Just like that, Ashlynn and Soren were inside the maintenance room, repeating the same process to get into the elevator maintenance shaft. It took some finagling, but the two of them made it into the shaft and loosened one of the panels so Soren could slip down on his line and press the button to take them up. The gears roared as they rode the elevator down. Ashlynn trembled hard, and Soren knew it. Being so close to all of these gears without the appropriate gear was dangerous, even deadly. Still, there she was. How did he get so lucky to have someone like her? "Get your mask ready," said Ashlynn as the elevator came to a halt. She thankfully braced herself and was ready for the full stop. As Ashlynn pulled the mask over her nose and mouth, she took one last clean breath before holding it as long as she could. Soren did the same. Sure enough, as they glanced around, there was a faint bit of what looked like dust or powder on the interior of the shaft. The two of them wasted no time in reaching over into one of the small gaps and pulling out what looked like a few matchbook ladders and storage containers. Ashlynn was careful to not leave fingerprints as she reached into the narrow passage and pulled out a string of Christmas lights. Once done, she lowered Soren once again into the elevator and had him press the next button. As they descended level to level, Ashlynn felt her hands starting to shake. Was this because of nerves, or was it from what still lingered in the air? They needed to finish, quickly. The next few levels were clear, but it was when they made it to the central hub that the two of them kicked their efforts into high gear. Soren stepped off of Ashlynn's hand and darted down the different hallways, tearing doors off of their fragile rubber band hinges and dragging out what he could as Ashlynn shoveled everything into her backpack. The tremor in Ashlynn's hands remained, but it did not increase, which was a good sign for her. Despite her heart pounding and her nervous breaths, she was feeling all right for the most part. Her nerves were trying and failing to get the better of her. Taking a breath and pulling the last of the Christmas lights into her bag, Ashlynn glanced around and felt pleased enough with her work that no one would question some of the random odds and ends that were further back in the walls. She glanced down and saw the faint glow of Soren's hip lamp just out of reach. He's probably finishing up some odds and ends, thought Ashlynn. "Soren?" called Ashlynn through her muffling face cover. "Soren, we need to get out of here." No response. Ashlynn glanced down and saw the vast darkness beneath her. It was a miracle no one was using the elevators at the moment. They were all probably at work. "Soren?" Ashlynn called again. Still no response. Ashlynn's stomach dropped as her heart flipped in place. Why wasn't he responding? What Ashlynn didn't know, and what she couldn't have known, was that Soren's heart was pounding faster and faster in his chest. It had become increasingly hard to breathe, even though he was being careful with his facial covering. It started as a small tremor, which Soren attributed to nerves. What they were doing was extremely dangerous, especially for Ashlynn, considering that she didn't have any security lines like he did, and it made him nervous. Then his chest started to feel tight. He thought it might have been the anxiety-inducing situation, but he was wrong. Now, with his body shaking violently, he realized with horror that the effects of the gas were influencing him. It was a compounding effect, and now that he realized it, his muscles were stiffening and moving was becoming incredibly painful. He tried jogging back quickly, but his muscles seized suddenly and brought him to his knees. How? Why? Was Ashlynn experiencing the same thing? He needed to get back to her. "Soren!" Ashlynn called again. Soren, crawling on all fours, forced himself closer to the entrance. The pain was increasing. Like a rising tide, it was dragging him under with every second that passed. His vision swirled while his heart palpitated. The edge of the wall was right there. He needed to make it. Ash! Soren choked out as the edges of his vision grew dark. He collapsed, body curling in on itself involuntarily. He couldn't even will himself to move. Then he heard it. Ashlynn. "Soren!" Soren suddenly felt weightless as he felt a pressure all around his body. It had to be Ashlynn saying his name. Trembling violently, Soren forced his eyes open as he looked into her panicking blue-gray eyes. Confusion washed over him. She seemed fine. Shaken, but fine. "Soren, I'm getting us out of here. Hang on," said Ashlynn, as she held him close to her chest, slipped through one of the panels on top of the elevator, and landed harshly in the main car. Ashlynn pressed the elevator button repeatedly, her whole body shaking. Surely the gas was gone, right? She didn't feel any different. Ashlynn pulled her mask off of her face and carefully pulled down Soren's facial covering. Maybe it's trapping the stuff in. Maybe he touched something and got a higher dose, she wondered. When she reached her floor, Ashlynn hurriedly cupped Soren to her chest, not daring to let him go, and rushed into her apartment and headed straight for the bathroom after locking the door behind her. She spotted the clock nearby and saw she had been gone for an hour. Crazy how much time had passed. Ashlynn hurriedly peeled off Soren's facial cover completely off of him and clasped him in her hands. He was shaking from head to toe, and his color was pale. "Soren, can you hear me? What happened? Did you see something or touch something else in there?" asked Ashlynn. She saw her hands had a faint coating of that dust-like powder on them. It was probably a bad idea, but she had to know. Setting Soren down on the sink counter, she kneeled, pressed her hand to her face, and breathed as deeply as she could. Nothing. There was a bit of a sweet smell to the powder, but nothing changed. She did it again and again, but nothing happened. Then a thought occurred. Was this stuff specifically created to target borrowers? Would Ashlynn need to huff a massive amount of this stuff for it to have an effect on her? She didn't want to know. What she did want to know was if Soren was going to be okay. Doing the only thing she knew to do, she turned on the hot water and gingerly held Soren under the current, hoping to wash away the powder from his clothes and keeping him warm. "Ashlynn, what happened?" Ashlynn heard Ray by the bathroom door.
Casper said you and Soren went into the walls. Is everything okay?
Dorian's voice was not far behind. Ashlynn glanced around to see Dorian and Ray jogging toward her. "Be careful," she warned, which halted the boys in their tracks. "There's something wrong. I think the powder from the gas is toxic. At least it's affecting Soren." Ashlynn felt her throat constrict as she brushed her finger gingerly over Soren's body. He was still trembling, but his breathing was slowly becoming more regular. "What? Is he okay?" demanded Dorian as he and Ray sprinted forward. Carefully, Ashlynn transferred Soren to one hand as she reached down and offered a wet hand to Dorian and Ray, who wasted no time in clambering on so they could see their brother. "I think he's going to be okay. He might have inhaled a lot of this stuff, which is weird since I don't feel anything. It either affects humans and borrowers differently, or he ran into a chamber of that gas and got a big dose of it that I didn't get." They spotted Soren under the water, taking in his pale features and trembling limbs. "That sicko," growled Ray. "Ashlynn, do you still have any of that powder?"
What on earth are you thinking? Dorian demanded.
"Only one way to test it," stated Ray. The teen spotted the edge of Ashlynn's clothing and the remnants of the powder on her sleeves. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and pressed his face to the cloth, taking in a big whiff. "Ray!" Ashlynn couldn't move away fast enough. She barely had enough time to move her hand under Ray before he collapsed to his knees and began hacking and gagging, clutching his hand to his chest. Thankfully, his hacking fit only lasted 10 or so seconds. But it was enough to confirm Ashlynn's theory.
I'm okay. I'm okay, wheezed Ray. Yeah, that was rough.
Do you not smell that? No, not really. It almost smells sweet. But for heaven's sake, Ray, what were you thinking? Demanded Ashlynn, as she held onto the reckless teen. Ray wheezed again and cleared his throat.
Fastest way to test the theory, muttered Ray. And it seems like you were right. You said you're not feeling this stuff. I felt it immediately. It's gotta be borrower specific. I'll bet that psycho made this stuff.
Dorian folded his arms across his chest and nodded solemnly. Makes sense. Austin had borrowers in captivity, so he would have had the perfect test subjects. Also, this whole gas thing, no one in the apartments would feel the effects. It would only get the borrowers. That's twisted stuff, mumbled Dorian, as he stared at his brother. Ashlynn, I need to lift down. I'm going to get Soren a change of clothes. You should do the same. Ray, get him out of that wet outfit when Ashlynn's done. Ashlynn lowered Dorian to the ground as Ray helped get Soren out of his wet clothes. Ashlynn peeled off some of her clothes, leaving her in a sports bra and her spandex, while Ray worked. When Dorian returned, Casper came with him.
Ashlynn, I just heard. Is Soren all right?
Casper called, a fatherly concern audible in his voice. I think so, she muttered, instinctually lowering her hand and letting Dorian on to bring him up onto the counter. She was about to move when she felt a second set of feet press against the pads of her fingers. Ashlynn glanced down and, to her surprise, saw Casper standing firmly beside Dorian. Electing not to question him, Ashlynn raised her hand back to the sink counter, but before the boys could begin redressing Soren, he stirred. Soren, breathed Ashlynn in pure relief. She pressed her hand against his back as Soren tried to sit upright. How do you feel?
Rough, but better.
Soren groaned. He looked up into Ashlynn's face, mustering a concerned smile.
Are you all right?
Tears in her eyes, Ashlynn nodded and, losing control, leaned forward and pressed her lips to his bare chest. Casper and Soren's brothers all looked away bashfully as Ashlynn pulled away, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm fine," she muttered. "Sorry. I just got so scared when you collapsed like that."
"Yeah,"
Soren breathed, pulling a half of a grin onto his face.
"Me too. Casper, we did what we could. We can only hope it's enough." "Thank goodness,"
stated Casper, as he knelt down and held out his hand to Soren.
"You have my eternal thanks, Soren. You saved us. Both of you saved us."
Ashlynn was about to respond when she heard something that made a shiver run through all of their spines. A knock at the door. All eyes turned to the front door where the knock came from. It was a bone-chilling sound, especially given recent events. Ashlynn was about to dismiss the noise when she and the borrowers on the bathroom counter heard someone call out. "Hello, Pest Control and Extermination. I'm here to ask a couple questions. Is the occupant, Ashlynn Mason, home?" Ashlynn looked around wildly to the borrowers, who had all subtly shifted themselves to hide slightly behind her. Ashlynn wanted to just ignore the door, but Ray suddenly spoke up. "Ashlynn, you need to answer the door," instructed the inventive borrower teen. All eyes were on him suddenly. "What? Ray, what are you—" "Ashlynn, maybe you can get some information. And maybe you can tell him to leave us alone. He also knows your name," said Ray. There was another knock at the door. "Hello, Pest Control and Extermination. Is anyone home? We might have a serious infestation here. I just need to ask a few questions." "Ray, he could just have gotten that from the main office. He might not remember me," Ashlynn hissed. "Please, Ashlynn, just try. He might just wait out there. You can get him to go away. At the very least, you can get some information out of him. Hit record on your phone, and we can edit out anything proving what a psycho he is," pleaded Ray. Ashlynn glanced to Soren and Dorian before looking back into Ray's pale blue eyes. She couldn't say no. Not to him. "Okay, get into the bedroom and tell everyone to be quiet," instructed Ashlynn, as she held out her hands. Everyone, including Casper, stepped on and let Ashlynn carry them to the entrance of the bedroom door. Once they were safely inside, Ashlynn braced herself and waited another few seconds before pulling out her phone, hitting record, and slipping it into her pocket just as she pulled a jacket over her body. The moment she opened the door, she recognized the boy immediately. Sure, years had passed, but he had that same devious look in his eyes and that gleam in his smile that was undeniable. Austin. He was wearing some kind of gray and white uniform with a ball cap and everything. It was some kind of jumpsuit that, oddly enough, made him look like some kind of escapee from an old-fashioned prison. Austin couldn't have been more than 18 or 19 years old, which made this whole thing so much worse. He was old enough when he was a child to know not to hurt another living being, and he was certainly old enough now to know that what he was doing was wrong. His eyes gleamed as he looked into Ashlynn's blue-gray eyes, which sent a shiver down her spine. Though the rest of the world might not have known it, Ashlynn suspected she was looking into the eyes of a true psychopath. "Hello, Miss Mason. My name is Austin, with Pest Control and Extermination. I got a call about a potential infestation and was wondering if I could ask you some questions about whether or not you've seen anything out of the Do I? Austin's glossy eyes narrowed as he looked into Ashlynn's face. "Do I know you?" Ashlynn, taking a deep breath in hopes to calm herself down, forced a smile and played into her part. She could only hope she could be convincing. "Actually, I think so. You used to live in Regent's Park, right?" asked Ashlynn. Suddenly, Austin's eyes lit up with recognition, and a knowing smile curled his lips upward. The look was chilling.
That's right, Ashlynn. You watched me a few times when I was much younger, right? Asked Austin. Ashlynn forced a nod and smiled.
Yes, that's right. And I see you've taken up a profession and everything. The time certainly has flown by, said Ashlynn.
It really has. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Do you think I could come in for a few minutes and ask you some questions? Like I said, I got a call about a potential infestation, and just need to have a quick look around, stated Austin. Ashlynn was afraid of this. She didn't want to let Austin in. She knew he would see the closed bedroom door and fling it wide open to reveal the whole borrower community she worked so hard to save. Instead, she raised her voice a little louder than normal and hoped with every fiber of her being the others would hear.
Come in? Why? Why do you need to come into my apartment? And did you say infestation? An infestation of what? Said Ashlynn.
There was just a moment when Austin's eyes flared, making Ashlynn's insides churn uneasily. Did Austin already guess what she was doing? Oh, just a mixture of things, said Austin quietly. People have noticed different things and signs. Really, it is just a precaution. So, may I enter?
That didn't really answer the question, Ashlynn stated, trying to laugh it off. What, is it mice, termites, cockroaches?
Then she saw it. A devious smile curled onto Austin's face, and an undeniable, greedy glow filled his dead, shark-like eyes. I think you and I both know the answer to that question, grinned Austin. Ashlynn's heart flipped, and she was sure her nerves were visible. She hoped to play it off, but she suspected it was already too late.
I don't know what you're talking about. And if you can't give me any more information, I'm afraid I'll have to decline without a formal request from the apartment and sufficient time to secure my personal belongings and vacate the premises and everything. It's part of the rules here at the Starlight Apartments that residents must be notified and given 24 hours to prepare, stated Ashlynn.
Thank goodness she had to get all of that homeowners association reading training for her work. It gave her all of the skills she needed to comb through her own contract. Sadly, it seemed to be the nail in the coffin for keeping a low profile. So, you did have something to do with it, muttered Austin. What? Are you in cahoots with them? Ashlynn swallowed dryly.
Them? The supposed mice infestation? She asked,
trying to sound joking and lighten the tone of her voice. No, them. The word was a haunting one, and not something she was eager to expand on. Sadly, Austin continued. You know what I'm talking about. The little people. You took one of them from me when I was a child. The first one I encountered, actually. You shuffled it away before I really realized what it was. It was now a staring contest, an ultimate game of chicken where neither party could swerve or reveal their hand to the other. Ashlynn clenched her fist from behind the door, her features hardening involuntarily. The fact that he could be so cavalier about injuring someone the way he did and ultimately killing them made her sick to her stomach. She prayed Ray and Dorian were not here to listen to any of this. How could she play this now? He addressed it. He talked about borrowers, but not by name. This was the evidence she needed to get that Ray was talking about. It was now or never. Austin, think about what you're doing, said Ashlynn softly. No, think about what you're doing, Ashlynn. No offense, but this is a golden opportunity. I have investors who are interested in samples and subjects.
Photos and videos alone aren't going to be enough to convince them, no, the world, about them, stated Austin. So, he only had photos and videos. Good. She could work with this. Ashlynn needed to discredit him. She needed it on audio. She needed to make it sound like Austin was out of his mind. Austin, you're better than this. Little people? Come on, there's no such thing, said Ashlynn.
No,
growled Austin, daring to take a step forward toward the slightly ajar apartment door.
There is, and you know it. Work with me, Ashlynn.
This is the investment opportunity of a lifetime. Think about the money you could get from selling one of these miniature twerps as toys or pets. They're parasites. They live and feed off of us. Why not make a buck in the process? It's a better life than scrounging for scraps. They're better off as pets. Ashlynn could have punched him straight in the nose, slapped him silly until her hands fell off. But instead she took a breath and kept her features hardened. And how do you plan on catching these imaginary little people? She asked, making sure to set him up for the next line of questioning.
They're not imaginary, and you know it, growled Austin.
And I have my ways. My investors let me experiment with some chemicals. I am confident my concoction will do the trick. Totally painless. It just immobilizes them. It's so they don't hurt themselves. And it works on these things? Anything else, like mice or other pests? Asked Ashlynn.
Yeah, but they're not the target, stated Austin.
And you have pictures and videos? Asked Ashlynn.
Austin nodded.
Cloud storage and hard copies. Those little critters are crafty, said Austin, his voice low and persuasive. Thankfully, it would never be enough for her to betray her friends, her family. She had heard enough. Ashlynn was done. She needed to get him away and go back to the others to regroup. Austin, what you're doing isn't right, said Ashlynn. Please, reconsider. Austin's face hardened as his fist clenched. Well then, sorry I can't bring you in as an investor. Too bad. You could have been famous for outing these little freaks, sneered Austin. Consider this your 24-hour notice. I'll need to evaluate your apartment for potential contamination. Austin grinned and, just like that, he plastered a smile back onto his face, hiding the sinister flare Ashlynn witnessed moments earlier, and moved on to the next apartment. Ashlynn hurriedly closed the door and locked it, leaning against the wood and sliding to the ground to take a fresh breath of air. How much did the community hear? Had they fled into the walls? It was bad if they did. They were quiet, but was it because they were trying to leave, or because they were hunkered down in place? Ashlynn didn't know, but she needed to figure it out. Not feeling strong enough to stand, she scooted across the floor and tapped on her bedroom door ever so softly in hopes to get Soren's attention. It was mere seconds later when Casper, Dorian, Ray, and even Soren all hurried outside, and Hira wasn't far behind.
Ashlynn,
breathed Soren as he stumbled over to Ashlynn's now extended hand and leaned against it. You heard? Asked Ashlynn. They all nodded solemnly. Everyone did, stated Hira. Ashlynn's stomach flipped nervously, but Dorian continued. And they heard what you said. They know what you did. You could have turned us all over to him, but you didn't. Hira and Dorian's smile were spread from ear to ear. So, what do we do now is the real question, stated Dorian. He's going to be back tomorrow, and we can't get into the walls because the stuff is still in there. No, we need to do more than that, stated Ray, his voice measured and calm. We need to get rid of the evidence. We need to report him. Ashlynn, you have your recorder on. Give it to Dorian. You need to edit out a little bit here and there so we can turn it over to someone, anyone, who can take Austin away. You're saying call the police on him? Asked Ashlynn. Yes, if that's who can get him away from us, retorted Ray. We need to tell them about those dangerous chemicals and say something, anything, to get him in trouble. Ashlynn thought hard about the situation, biting her lip and nodding as a plan started to formulate in her mind. Okay, let's go over what we know, she stated, reaching her thumb over to brush against Soren's shoulder. Austin doesn't know about everyone being safe here. He suspects it, but he also thinks he has borrowers back in his van and that his gas probably got a few borrowers. If I call the authorities to investigate the van, we can separate him from that at the very least. Then let's do it, said Ray eagerly. There's something else to all of this too, said Ashlynn, now looking over to Casper and making sure to catch his gaze before continuing. Even if we manage to stop Austin here, it doesn't stop him from targeting this building. I know this is your home, but you all are not going to be safe here anymore. Casper took a deep breath and nodded regretfully.
I suspected as much. This is going to be a blow to the community. I don't even know how to tell them, stated the middle-aged father. There was a long pause, and the silence was one Soren was familiar with. Ashlynn usually fell silent like this when she knew what she wanted to say, but wasn't sure how to go about it, and he suspected he knew what she wanted to say and do.
Ashlynn, prompted Soren. His tone of voice was enough to gain a nervous smile from his chosen partner. Casper, there is another solution. Instead of having everyone migrate and everything, I know it's dangerous, and this is something all of you would have to choose to do, stated Ashlynn. Casper looked up into Ashlynn's eyes with a hopeful gleam.
Oh, and what is that?
I bought a house. I've taken them to see it, and we think borrowers used to live there. Instead of migrating on your own, pulling apart the community that's grown so close, why not come with us? Asked Ashlynn. You don't have to answer now, and you have to talk it over with everyone, but I want you all to think it over. I'll get you out of here, safe and sound. You can live freely and in a neighborhood where you all could technically move once you're out of here.
Come with you,
stammered Casper, obviously short-circuiting at the suggestion.
Have you pack us up in boxes and take us somewhere we've never been? Put every one of our lives in your hands?
Dad, think about it, pleaded Hero. Ashlynn has a point. We'll be safe. We know her, and the others just heard her get rid of Austin. She can protect us if we need it, and we won't have to stay with her forever if we don't want to. It's the best way to get everyone out of here safely. Just think it over. Quickly, but think it over, stated Ashlynn. In the meantime, we have some work to do, right? Soren and his brothers nodded as they took Ashlynn's phone and began trimming the audio. They were fighting the clock, and they didn't even know if their plan was going to work. But it had to. For all of their sakes, it had to.